Your son shouldn't have been parked there, Mr. Halvick. This was a consequence of non-compliance. That's what Lenora Braddock, president of our HOA board, said to my face, in front of 20 neighbors, with my son still in a coma. She said it like we were discussing landscaping violations, like Evan's skull hadn't been fractured by her son's fists just days earlier. She folded her arms, smug in her blouse the color of dried blood, and added, "We've reviewed the situation. No HOA guidelines were broken on our end." I stared at her, and then, very quietly, I said, "You should know the backup surveillance still pings to my off-site mirror, even if your system's been wiped." Her smile dropped. If you're a parent, especially a father who's trained teams to dismantle hostage standoffs, you'll understand why I didn't flinch. My son's life was hanging by a thread, and she was playing PR games in the neighborhood rec hall. Subscribe now if you've ever had to face people like this, because what happens next will change how you see HOA law forever. My name is Rowan Holvik, and I don't run from problems. I train SWAT sniper units on how to breach hostile ground under pressure. I teach de-escalation tactics to police departments across the state. But none of that mattered the day my son got ambushed over a parking spot. I wasn't there when it happened. That's the part I'll never forget. Evan had parked in a visitor slot to help an elderly neighbor with groceries. Kellen Braddock, Lenora's son, 28 years old, jobless, still living off his mother's HOA power, waited for him to come back from the front porch. He didn't say a word, just waited in the dark. And when Evan turned around, Kellen crushed his temple against the brick wall. 4 blows. No camera feed, no witnesses willing to talk. Just my son's blood drying into the concrete. I found out when the hospital called. What Lenora didn't know was that I'd mounted a secondary lens system last year during a security contract, still operational from the observation tower across from the street. She also didn't know that I still owned the legacy credentials that flag data edits on the HOA's private servers. The night of the attack, someone triggered a wipe attempt at 2:41 a.m., the same time the official system malfunctioned. This isn't about parking. It never was. That spot Evan parked in, it sat in front of the only tree we have left from when the land still carried the weight of memory. That oak stood during the base's final deployment ceremony. My wife's name is carved into its side, beneath Evan's initials, etched the day we buried her. We called it Eagle's Rest. Evan parks there every time he needs to clear his head, every time he wants to talk to her. The night he was attacked was her birthday. So when Lenora stood there, arms folded, acting like we were the problem, I didn't speak out of anger. I spoke out of truth. "I know Kellen was already on HOA record for 2 prior aggression incidents," I said, my voice calm. "And I know you buried both under administrative notes." She flinched. "Evan was a cadet, quiet, disciplined. He wouldn't fight back if you paid him to. You think I'm scared to push this through the chain?" Around the room, eyes started shifting. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now looked down. A few backed away. That's when she made her final mistake. "You're making this personal," she said. I took a breath. "It was always personal," I said. "You just assumed I didn't have the reach to prove it." She didn't respond, because even she knew what that meant. You see, I walked into that meeting a grieving father, but I walked out as something far more dangerous, a professional with legal leverage, federal contacts, and a son on life support. And I had just declared war on the one institution in Red Marsh Crossings that thought it was untouchable. Where are you watching from? Because tomorrow I call in my first favor, and that's when the real war begins. The first fine showed up a week before the attack. A plain envelope taped to our front door, like some passive-aggressive ransom note. "Improper parking violation," it said, citing a visitor vehicle obstructing line of sight. The photo showed Evan's car, parked straight, nothing behind or in front. No obstruction, no blocking. Just a teenage boy trying to help a neighbor carry her oxygen tank to the porch. I emailed the board that night, got a reply the next day from the HOA's shared address. "All board decisions are final. Repeated violations may result in community-level review." And that's when I realized something had shifted. Red Marsh Crossings was always rigid, but we used to joke about it. Mandatory mailbox color, blade height regulations, curated driveway aesthetics. But it was theater mostly, until Lenora Braddock stepped up as president last fall. Her son, Kellen, moved back in around the same time, fresh off a failed law enforcement academy run. We weren't told why he was dismissed, only that he needed time to regroup. What actually happened, I learned later, involved an off-the-books brawl at a bar, 3 broken fingers, and a quiet settlement. But Lenora ran the board like a personal monarchy, and Kellen acted like a prince. He parked diagonally across 3 visitor spots, revved his car at 2 a.m., poured bleach on the communal grass when someone's dog barked too long. Still, no citations, no complaints, no action. Evan and I kept our heads down until the second fine hit. This time, unauthorized lawn fixture. It was a flag, not even a real flag, just a stitched cloth on a pole Evan had made himself, with a blue stripe through the center, a tribute to his mother, who served as a military trauma nurse. Lenora called it a violation of non-approved decorative themes. But it wasn't just us. 2. Doors down, the Ruiz family got cited for their wheelchair ramp railing paint being a non-blend matte. Across the street, a retired teacher named Mrs. Hennings was warned for over-personalized porch decor. The HOA newsletter, once a cheerful update, had turned into a veiled threat list. Fines, hearings, compliance notices. Always vague, always final. At first the community whispered, but no one spoke up, because no one wanted to be next. I watched this unfold from our porch, sometimes seated at the base of Eagle's Rest, the old oak tree where Evan and I used to track clouds and share silent evenings. It stood at the end of the observation row, once a sniper line, now a cul-de-sac of culled silence. But I noticed the pattern. Lenora's new rules always came with a mirror. Every fine sent to a family like ours was matched by silence for her own. Kellen once sped through the intersection at 50. The mailboxes shook. Kids scattered. The cameras caught it. I know they did. But no fine. No community notice. When I brought it up during a board meeting, Lenora smiled and said, "That matter's been handled internally." Her voice was polished, trained, like she practiced these phrases in front of a mirror. That week, our trash can was cited for being visible for more than 12 minutes post-collection. Yes, they tracked it. 12 minutes. Evan took it in stride. He always did. He said, "We'll just outlast them, Dad." I remember those words like they were spoken 5 minutes ago. But the day it really turned was the morning Evan parked near the Braddock's property line for exactly 8 minutes. He was waiting to pick up a signed form for school. When he came back, Kellen was standing beside his car, arms folded, chewing something. "You think rules don't apply to your kind?" Kellen had asked. Evan told me later that the words didn't even register as threatening, just bizarre. He smiled, tried to walk past. Kellen spat near his foot. "Your daddy doesn't own this block, kid. Neither do you." Evan told me he didn't say anything, just walked. But Kellen followed him, said something about respect, said something about paying for space you think you deserve. That's when I requested the security footage, and that's when I was told the system had experienced a routing failure due to a firmware patch. I've worked in surveillance for 2 decades. I know the firmware version they use. I wrote part of it 10 years ago. There are no routing failures, just like there are no accidents in places like Red Marsh Crossings, only patterns. And soon there would be a reckoning, not just for my son, but for every neighbor too afraid to speak, every voice flattened under a fine, every memory erased under mulch and bylaws. It started with silence. But I don't do silence anymore. Elias Dorn was the kind of man people forgot was in the room. That was his power, I think. Quiet posture, neutral, shirts, that engineer's stillness that makes you wonder if he's thinking or simply waiting for the noise to end. For months, he'd sat beside Lenora during every HOA meeting, nodding, typing, never speaking unless a number needed correcting. But that night, after Lenora tried to shut me down, he did something he'd never done before. He looked at me, not a glance, not a flinch. A full, deliberate look, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, eyes shifting between me and the board's locked storage room, where the server rack sat humming behind tinted glass. I'd spent long enough reading stress signals to know what I was seeing. Guilt. The meeting ended with murmurs and forced smiles, neighbors moving past me with practiced avoidance. I waited until the hall emptied, until even Lenora's perfume faded down the corridor. Only Elias remained, stuffing paperwork into a manila folder the color of weak tea, pretending not to care that I was still standing there. I stepped closer. "Rough night," I said. He froze for half a second, barely detectable unless you've spent years watching hostages mask panic or shooters mask intent. He recovered quickly, closing the folder like the conversation was already over. "It's complicated," he said, adjusting his glasses. "It usually is," I replied, keeping my voice low, especially when footage goes missing. His hand stopped moving. There it was again, that micro stutter. The tiny giveaway that someone isn't lying, but they are choosing silence because truth is too dangerous. The overhead fluorescents buzzed above us, reflecting off the server room's tinted window. Inside, the racks glowed a soft blue, new hardware, expensive, redundant. The kind of system that didn't just lose data, not without help. "Evan deserved better," Elias said finally, not loud, not public. Just a breath he didn't mean to let slip. That was enough to make me step closer, close enough to see the sweat forming at his temples, close enough to see the way he swallowed before he spoke again. "She shouldn't have handled it that way. Not we, not the board. She." And that pronoun told me more than any confession. "You oversaw the installation?" I asked. He hesitated before nodding. "Yes, the whole system. Camera grid, backup nodes, power redundancy." "Then you know the firmware she blamed doesn't glitch." Another hesitation, a longer one. "It shouldn't," he said quietly. I watched his pupils shift, left, right, toward the door, toward the server room. Engineers don't like confrontation. They like truth, numbers, data, predictability. When people like Elias see injustice, it eats them alive, slowly, from the inside out. "She asked me not to escalate things," he said. That choice of verb, asked, was a confession in itself. "She," I pressed. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because engineers don't sweat over firmware updates. They sweat over lies. We walked out into the hallway together, though neither of us spoke for a long moment. The building was quiet, just the echo of our footsteps and the hum of the exit sign. "Look," he finally whispered, glancing behind him even though we were alone. "I can't go against her outright. Didn't ask you to. But I also can't keep—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'm vice president, Rowan, not a puppet." There it was, a fracture, tiny but real. "You're in a difficult position," I said. He exhaled through his nose, a sharp breath of frustration. "You think?" For the first time since I'd known him, Elias's mask slipped. His voice was low, strained, cracking at the edges. "She made the decision without a vote, without minutes, without protocol, and now I'm supposed to pretend everything is stable while a kid is fighting for his life." His voice softened. "Your kid." He looked shaken. His fingers twitched like he wanted to reach into the server room and pull out the truth by hand. "You didn't hit Evan," I said, "and you didn't break the system." "No," he said, "but I didn't stop her either. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was an admission of weight. You don't have to take her down," I told him. "You just have to stop protecting her." His breath hitched, not fear, but something close to relief. A man drowning who finally sees the shoreline. He straightened his folder, cleared his throat. Mask slid back into place. "I should lock up," he said. But as he walked away, he paused at the server room door. And for half a second, his hand rested on the keypad, just long enough to confirm one thing. He knew the truth. He knew I knew. And he was dangerously close to doing something about it. When he finally left the building, the server room stayed humming behind me, running its perfect tamper-proof backups. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that sooner or later, Elias Dorn would crack. Not because he wanted to help me, but because he couldn't live with what he'd witnessed. He just needed the right push. The envelope on my porch wasn't white this time. It was red, bright, bold, almost celebratory in its cruelty. Taped crooked against the glass, flapping slightly in the breeze. The heading read, "Final Enforcement Notice." The charge, disruptive conduct unbecoming of a community member. The fine, $1,000. The violation, standing up at the last board meeting and speaking while not recognized by the chair. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. This wasn't about Evan. It wasn't even about me. This was Lenora Braddock marking territory, like an animal. A signal to the neighborhood. Challenge her authority, and the fines will find you. And they won't stop. Inside the house, my boots echoed across the tile as I crossed the living room. I hadn't slept the night before. I'd been at the hospital, sitting beside Evan's unmoving body, listening to the hiss of machines that shouldn't have to breathe for a 17-year-old. His hand was still warm, but his fingers never twitched. I pinned the red envelope to our refrigerator beside a photo of him smiling at the observation tower. It didn't belong there, but I wanted to see it every time I walked by. I needed the reminder. I opened the HOA's online portal next. Lenora had updated the violation to include a second charge: defamation of an HOA board officer, a neatly worded complaint claiming I had slandered her character by accusing her of suppressing evidence. Attached was a statement. It is important that our community remain unified during this time. False claims and inflammatory speech will not be tolerated. Signed, Lenora Braddock, President, Red Marsh Crossings. HOA. I leaned back in my chair. My home used to feel like a stronghold, a fortress of memory and stability. Now it felt like a glass house under siege. Every motion watched, every inch regulated. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, scrolled to the enforcement section. She'd cited the Public Decorum Clause, Section 4.2.3.3, a clause meant to regulate drunk outbursts during meetings, not a grieving father demanding accountability. But it was just vague enough to exploit, and that's when it hit me. Lenora wasn't just trying to punish me, she was trying to bait me. She wanted a reaction, something aggressive, something she could point to and say, "See, he's unstable." So, I didn't give her one. Instead, I requested a formal review hearing. I knew she'd deny it, and that would be her next mistake. I stepped outside, needing air. The sun had dipped below the ridgeline. Across the street, the Ruiz kids were playing basketball on a silent hoop. No music, no laughter. Their mother stood at the doorway, arms crossed. She didn't wave. 3 houses down, the Hartleys had removed their wind chimes and porch chairs. The friendly decorations were gone. The community was shrinking in on itself, one fine at a time. This wasn't just about Evan anymore. Lenora was choking the entire block into silence. I walked to the edge of Observation Row, to Eagle's Rest, the old tree that had been ours long before Red Marsh became a showcase for luxury compliance. The bark was scarred from age, the initials Evan had carved fading, but still legible. I ran my hand over them. "You used to climb this with one arm," I murmured, my voice dry. The memory hit hard. Evan, age 11, laughing from the top branch, dangling his feet like the world couldn't touch him. He'd fallen once, scraped his ribs raw. I'd panicked. He'd laughed. "Didn't think I'd fall, huh, Dad?" He always trusted the ground to catch him. I hadn't, not this time. Back inside, I sent 2 emails. The first was to the county registrar, requesting a copy of Red Marsh Crossings, corporate charter and board conduct filings. The second was to an old colleague, Detective Hollis Verne. We hadn't spoken in years, but I knew he still handled HOA abuse cases in the state's Southern Division. Subject: urgent, obstruction, HOA suppression, potential evidence tampering. Body: need a consult. One of ours is hurt. I have a name and a motive. I'll bring the proof. Then I sat and waited, not for them, for the next envelope. Because if Lenora thought she'd scared me into stillness, she didn't understand who I was. I don't shoot first, but I never miss. Marla Singh opened her door just wide enough to see me and no more. One hand gripped the edge of the frame, the other clutched a crumpled dish towel. Her eyes darted up and down the street before settling on me, guarded. "I can't talk long," she whispered. "She's already suspicious." I nodded. I hadn't come to pressure her, just to ask a question she already knew was coming. "Your daughter saw what happened, didn't she?" Her breath caught. The towel twisted in her hand like she might wring water from it, but it was bone dry. She didn't answer right away. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of their hallway. Empty picture frames on one wall. The ones with her husband in uniform had been taken down after the last HOA complaint. "She's 15. Marla finally said, barely above a whisper. She was doing homework in her room. The window faces the street. And she saw Evan? I asked. She nodded, quick and tight. She saw everything. From the second Kellen crossed the sidewalk to the moment Evan went down. She said he didn't even raise a hand. I took that in without moving. Not a muscle. It was exactly what I'd suspected. But hearing it out loud still felt like a gut punch. Did she say anything else? I asked. Marla hesitated, voice strained. She said Kellen looked calm, like he'd been waiting for it, like it was planned. Of course it was. And you didn't come forward because, I began. Because Lenora left a handwritten note in our mailbox the next morning, Marla said, her voice turning bitter. It said, "Let's not involve children in matters they don't understand. No signature, no letterhead, just that sentence, in red ink. A warning without teeth, but enough to silence a mother already under the HOA's microscope. Marla had been fined 3 times in the past 2 months, once for non-compliant curtain color, once for potted plant density, and once for a so-called guest trespasser, her nephew, who walked a dog without registering it with the board. She thinks I'll stay quiet, she said, because I have more to lose. She's right, I said gently. You do. That stung, but it was true. Unlike me, Marla had 2 kids, a husband out of state, and a mortgage tied up in Red Marsh's ridiculous equity restrictions. She was exactly the kind of person Lenora preyed on, someone whose silence could be bought with fear and fines. She won't get away with it, I said. Marla looked up at me, tired but sharp. She already has. No one else saw it. No one else is willing to say a word. I'm not asking you to testify, I told her. I'm asking if your daughter still has her homework journal from that night. She blinked. Why? Because sometimes, I said, teenagers write down what they're too scared to say. She didn't answer, but her hand fell away from the doorframe. After a long pause, she stepped back and opened the door wider. She keeps everything, she said. It's upstairs. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that feels enforced, not chosen. A TV played softly in a back room, but no one was watching it. Marla led me to the kitchen, where she motioned for me to sit while she disappeared upstairs. I didn't touch anything, just stared at the family calendar on the fridge. Every day since the attack had a red X through it. She returned 10 minutes later, holding a thin purple notebook. She wrote it down the next morning, Marla said. She told me she was afraid she'd forget. I took it gently, flipped to the marked page, and there it was, in teenage scrawl and green pen. Kellen was already there when Evan walked back. He stepped out of the bushes. He didn't say much, just hit him. He didn't even look mad. It was like he thought he was cleaning something up. I closed the notebook and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just assault, it was premeditated. Thank you, I said. You just gave me a thread. Marla's face twisted. She'll come after us. No, I said, standing. She'll try, but not after what happens next. Because now I had a witness, a timeline, a documented pattern of harassment, and a silent neighborhood starting to crack. And soon, I'd have the one thing Lenora couldn't erase, proof. The machines in Evan's room clicked and breathed with clinical precision. A monitor beside the bed traced every heartbeat with a lazy, rhythmic pulse. He hadn't moved, not since the night Kellen left him bleeding on the concrete. The doctors didn't offer false hope. They said words like pressure, swelling, and if, but they didn't say when. I sat beside him, elbows on my knees, staring at his motionless hands. I'd wrapped those same fingers in gauze when he was 7 and tried climbing the chain-link fence behind our old duplex. I'd shown him how to hold a training rifle when he was 10. Steady wrists, slow breath, trust your sightline. Now those hands lay limp on stiff white sheets. A nurse came in to check his IV. She smiled, adjusted the monitor, and left without speaking. She'd seen me enough to know I didn't need small talk. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos folder, scrolled past images of our house before the HOA stripped it of personality, past barbecue nights, past that one blurry shot of Evan asleep in the old hammock, a physics book open on his chest. I stopped at the last video he ever sent me. He was standing at Eagle's Rest, filming the tree from below. The wind was heavy that day, leaves shaking, light pouring through the gaps like something divine. In the background, I heard his voice. "Still here, Dad, just like you said it would be." He'd meant the tree, but I heard more than that. I looked at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I made the call. "Rowan?" Detective Hollis Verne answered on the third ring, voice scratchy with exhaustion. "I've got motive, timeline, and a minor witness too scared to speak. Evan's in a coma. The HOA's deleting footage and issuing fines like it's a game." A pause. "You think they're suppressing evidence?" "I know they are. And the vice president's cracking. I just need your department to pull the thread." He exhaled slowly. "Send me what you have, and Rowan." "Yeah? If they're playing that kind of game, don't wait too long." After I hung up, I walked down the hall to the hospital chapel. Not because I'm religious, I'm not, but because it was quiet and I needed space to think. The room was dark, lit by a few amber wall sconces, rows of empty chairs, a simple altar. On the far wall, a stained glass panel shaped like a tree. It wasn't Eagle's Rest, but it felt close. I sat in the back and thought about the man I used to be. The one who trained men to kill with precision, to clear a room in seconds, to take impossible shots and walk away without flinching. I left that behind when Evan was born. I'd buried it, filed it away with the medals and the old photos. But now my son was broken, and all I had were tools I swore I'd never use again. By the time I returned home, the street was dark. My porch light was out, cut, not burned. I stepped over the lawn and spotted a new envelope taped to the mailbox. "Failure to maintain landscape lighting, $250 fine." It was signed this time, in handwriting I recognized. Red ink. Lenora. I didn't take the envelope down. I didn't even touch it. Just walked back inside, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I compiled everything: timestamps, camera zones, archived HOA policies, complaint patterns, photographs of fines, the notebook page from Marla's daughter. At the center of it all, I wrote one name in bold: Kellen Braddock, known pattern offender, witnessed assault. Below it, Lenora Braddock, HOA president, administrative suppression, potential tampering. I encrypted the file, uploaded it to a secure folder, and sent it to Hollis with the subject line, "Trigger." Because that's what this was now. Not a plea, not a complaint, not a request for fairness. A trigger. The final one. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the house. I thought about Evan, about the tree, about the years I'd spent keeping the world away from him, building a life where he could be safe, quiet, his own kind of strong. Then I thought about what it would take to break that silence, and I realized something. I wasn't going back, I wasn't waiting, I was done protecting the peace. Now I was going to use every ounce of experience I had to force accountability into the light, even if I had to burn the whole board down to do it. The message came in at 3:12 a.m. No subject, just a single line: "I need to talk, alone." ED. I didn't sleep after that. By sunrise, I was at the edge of Observation Row, leaning against the base of Eagle's Rest. The bark was damp from the night air, the scent of moss and memory clinging to its roots. Birds stirred above me, somewhere in the canopy, but I couldn't hear them over the buzz in my skull. Elias showed up 15 minutes later. No briefcase, no clipboard. Just a gray hoodie, jeans, and that familiar hesitation in his step. He walked like he was being followed, head on a swivel, shoulders hunched like guilt had weight. He stopped a few feet from me, glanced at the tree, then down at the soil between us. "I have something," he said. I didn't move, just let the silence settle over him. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and held it out. "This is everything: raw logs, security system backups, internal deletion attempts, the original footage from the Northeast Pole cam, with timestamps." I took it carefully, turning it once in my hand. It was plain, black, no label, but it felt heavier than anything I'd held in months. "She told us the footage didn't exist," I said quietly. "She lied." His voice cracked on the word. "It was flagged, tampered, but not deleted." I raised an eyebrow. He swallowed. "The system has a mirrored node, one I didn't tell her about. It archives critical footage redundantly before board-approved wipes. I installed it years ago, after we had that break-in on Falcon Drive. And you never told her. She didn't ask. He looked up at me then, eyes raw. I thought if I didn't say anything, it wouldn't come to this, that someone else would speak up. But no one ever does, do they? No, I said. They don't. I pocketed the drive. Have you seen what's on it? He nodded. Only once. That was enough. I didn't press. I didn't need to. His face told me everything. You sure you're ready for what comes after this? I asked. No. He looked up at the tree, voice shaking. But I'm more afraid of staying quiet. He turned to go, then stopped. She's going to know it was me. She already does, I said. His shoulders dropped. He nodded once and walked away. I waited until he was gone before heading back to my truck. Locked the flash drive in a steel case I'd used for ballistic schematics back when I trained field teams. Drove straight to my private office, a rented, back room above an old pawn shop, stripped to concrete and drywall, but wired with enough security to make a federal contractor proud. I connected the drive to a closed system, disabled outbound connections, and opened the first file. There was no sound, just footage, cold, sharp, unflinching. Evan walking calmly down the sidewalk, returning from the neighbor's porch. Kellen stepping out from behind a hedge, calculated, not reactive. No warning, no words. Just a single brutal strike to the side of Evan's head. He collapsed instantly, didn't even have time to raise his arms. Then came the second blow, and the third, and the fourth. Kellen stood over him for several seconds. Then he wiped his hands on his jeans and walked away like nothing had happened. No panic, no hesitation. I paused the footage, rewound, watched it again, and then again. By the time I shut the file, my hands were clenched so tight my knuckles had gone white. My chest burned with a fury I hadn't felt since the night I watched a hostage bleed out during a failed extraction overseas. But this time, it wasn't war. It was home. I bundled the footage with the metadata, camera logs, system pings, and timestamp overlays. Compiled a report, labeled every frame. Then I opened a secure channel to Detective Vern and hit send. All of it. And as the files uploaded, I looked out the window at the quiet street below. Red Marsh Crossings had buried too many truths, but now one of them was bleeding into the open, and the rest were about to follow. I spent the next 48 hours doing what I was trained to do. Build a perimeter, not with wire or steel or barricades, but with truth, evidence, and strategic pressure. The kind that doesn't just protect, it corners. Because if you box someone like Lenora Braddock in, she'll do what all tyrants do when exposed, panic. I wanted her cornered, panicked, desperate enough to make mistakes. The first step was the footage. I'd already sent the full packet to Detective Vern, but that wasn't enough. Cops move slow. Bureaucracy moves slower. I needed something faster, something visible. So I reached out to someone else. Elena Maris, civil rights attorney, former JAG, and a friend I owed a favor to. We met years ago on a wrongful detention case I'd helped reconstruct. She was the kind of lawyer who wore silence like armor and made judges sweat just by adjusting her glasses. Elena, I said as soon as she picked up, I have something. Assault, HOA suppression, minors involved. Board president is burying it. She didn't ask why I was calling at 6 a.m. She only said, how fast do you need it moved? Now. By noon, she had filed a notice of intent to pursue civil liability against the Red Marsh Crossings HOA and its president, citing reckless negligence, obstruction, and tampering with security infrastructure during an active criminal investigation. By 2, her assistant had hand-delivered the documents to the HOA office. By 3, I had confirmation. Lenora had received them and hadn't responded. Step 1, legal trigger, pulled. Step 2 was visibility. Lenora operated on image. She controlled Red Marsh through perception, fear of fines, shame from neighbors, whispers at board meetings. That control relied on silence. So I opened the door to the one place she couldn't control, city records. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for all Red Marsh Board correspondences related to safety enforcement, internal citations, and complaint escalations over the past 12 months. I already knew the system from previous work. I used to train municipal compliance officers on how to spot document manipulation. I flagged 6 emails that contradicted board statements. One in particular made my jaw tighten. A message from Lenora to another board member sent 4 days before Evan was assaulted. Subject: Kellen situation, need eyes on Holvik kid. Body: if he parks near the hedge again, we'll issue the formal notice. If he escalates, I'll authorize sanctions. If he escalates. Evan never escalated anything in his life. Step 3. I reached out to my network. 2 of my brothers, active SWAT commanders in neighboring counties, helped me draft the framework for what came next. A community safety seminar hosted under city partnership, open to Red Marsh residents, focused on civil protection, de-escalation, and homeowners' legal rights. The city approved it within the hour. Location: the Observation Tower, Memorial, Green. Date: 7 days from now. Host: Rowan Halvick, Certified Public Safety Consultant. Partners: County Sheriff's Office, Civil Rights Legal League, Department of Neighborhood Integrity. I didn't bother asking for HOA permission. The green space was public under municipal zoning, even though Lenora had tried to privatize it last year and failed the vote. This seminar wasn't just about awareness, it was bait, a public event, with media coverage, with legal representatives, with cameras. A place Lenora couldn't control, moderate or mute. A place where the truth could be seen, and where her silence would be louder than any denial. I sent the flyer to every inbox on the community mailing list, posted it on the HOA forum, printed copies, and handed them out at the grocery store. By the end of the day, it was everywhere, and I made sure to put Evan's name on it. Hosted in honor of Evan Halvick, age 17, a quiet soul, a loyal neighbor, a victim of silence. That night, I stood at the foot of Eagle's Rest and looked up through the branches. The wind moved through the leaves like breath. I imagined Evan sitting up there, feet swinging, that crooked smile he always wore when he knew he'd gotten away with something. I let the quiet wrap around me, not because I was done, but because I was finally ready. The board didn't know it yet, but their days of hiding were numbered. The morning of the seminar, I stood at the base of the observation tower and watched the preparations unfold like clockwork. The grass had been trimmed, the folding chairs delivered, the podium placed beneath the old brass plaque that once honored military sharpshooters. Now it bore a paper banner taped clean across its face. Community Safety and Accountability Seminar in honor of Evan Halvick. The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't write them. Marla Singh did. She showed up early with her daughter, who placed small blue ribbons on each chair. She never looked me in the eye, but I didn't need her to. She showed up. That was enough. By 9 a.m., my 2 brothers arrived, Micah and Grayson Halvick, both in full SWAT dress, both stone-faced, professional, and calm. They greeted the sheriff's liaison, exchanged clipped nods with the city's civil enforcement rep, then took their places beside me with the quiet discipline we were raised on. They didn't come to intimidate. They came to be seen. Because sometimes the mere presence of truth, armed, legal, and composed, is more devastating than any accusation. By 10:30, we had a crowd. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact with me in weeks now stood shoulder to shoulder in lawn chairs. The Ruiz family, the Hartleys, even Elias Dorn stood in the back, wearing a pale green shirt and holding a clipboard like he was just another attendee. He wasn't. He was the reason we had the footage queued on the AV setup, a simple screen mounted on a speaker cart connected to a hardline laptop. No Wi-Fi, no remote override. At 10:59, I took the stage. I didn't raise my voice, didn't start with blame. I started with my son. I told them about the tree, the mornings he sat beneath it with a book, the nights we watched stars from its roots. I told them how Evan wanted to go into crisis response, not because of me, but in spite of me. He wanted to help people without having to carry a gun. Then I told them about the night he was attacked, not in rage, not with fury, with precision, with planning, with silence as a weapon. I walked them through the footage, frame by frame. I showed them Kellen's body language, the way he waited in the hedge line, the posture of someone executing an act, not stumbling into one. I showed the unprovoked blows, Evan's fall, the final kick. The screen flickered, the air thickened, and I let the silence stretch. When I finally looked up, Lenora Braddock was standing at the edge of the gathering, flanked by 2 board members. She wore a stiff beige pantsuit and her signature smirk. But her eyes, those betrayed her. They didn't hold confidence. They held calculation. A scan for exits, for allies, for anything resembling control. She didn't find it, because every face she turned to had already seen what she wanted hidden. I held up a printout of her email, the one with the subject line, "Need eyes on Halvik, kid." "This," I said, "is how you turn policy into pretext. This is how you let violence grow in the cracks between silence." I folded the paper, set it down. Every HOA board operates with the trust of its community. That trust ends when leadership forgets who they serve. At the back, Elias stepped forward. He raised a hand, voice shaking but steady. "I move for a special emergency vote," he said, per Section 5.1 of the Charter, to remove the sitting president for cause. Gasps broke the silence. Lenora opened her mouth, but no words came, because she knew the clause. She helped write it, and now it was being used against her. The sheriff's rep nodded. "All in favor?" Hands rose, dozens of them, even from people I hadn't seen speak in months, even from those who feared retaliation, even from Marla's daughter. The vote passed. Lenora stood frozen for a beat. Then she turned, walked away without a word, and disappeared behind the tower's back gate. She didn't stop to argue, because power built on silence crumbles the second someone speaks louder, and for the first time in Red Marsh Crossings, the silence was gone. The following morning, I drove to the hospital before the sun cleared the rooftops. The roads were still wet from a midnight drizzle, the pavement dark and gleaming, like the town itself was trying to wash something off. Evan hadn't moved. Same monitors, same beeping, same fragile chest rising and falling, like the air was reluctant to fill him. But something had shifted in me. Not the grief, that was constant, but the weight of helplessness had lightened, just a little, the kind of shift you feel when you stop waiting for justice and start dragging it into the light by the throat. I sat beside him in silence for a while, watching the sunlight inch across the tile floor. Then I told him everything, about Elias, about the footage, about the vote, about the way Lenora's face twisted when the hands started rising, one after another, about how nobody clapped because it wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a reckoning. I told him the tree was still standing, and I told him I was sorry for not stopping it sooner, for trusting that silence would be enough. His hand didn't move, but I kept talking because sometimes the words are for the speaker, not the listener. By noon, I was standing in front of the HOA office. The building looked smaller now, less intimidating. The lettering on the front glass still read Red Marsh Crossings Community Affairs, but the name felt like it belonged to someone else's neighborhood. Inside, Elias sat behind the desk. "Temporarily appointed as acting president until a full vote could be held," he said. His shirt was ironed but wrinkled at the cuffs, his tie slightly off-center. He looked like a man still getting used to his spine. "Most of the board resigned this morning," he told me. "Didn't even ask for hearings." "They know what's coming," I said. He nodded. "The insurance rep called. She said they are opening an emergency liability audit on Lenora's tenure. If negligence is confirmed, the HOA's policy is going to crater. She'll try to shift blame. Not with your files, not with the footage, not with the vote." He hesitated, then added, "And not with me." He handed me a manila folder. Inside were copies of every citation Evan had ever received, each now formally rescinded, a letter of apology from the acting board, and at the bottom, a document requesting a formal renaming of the observation tower green. I looked up at him. "We'd like to name it Evan's Post," Elias said, "if you're okay with that." For a second, I couldn't speak, just nodded, slowly. He stood, offered his hand. This time, I took it. Outside, the sun had broken fully through the clouds. I stood for a moment on the walkway, folder under my arm, watching as neighbors I hadn't seen in weeks returned from the grocery store or walked their dogs again without fear. The wind moved through the hedges like breath returned to lungs long collapsed. At the base of Eagle's Rest, I found something new, a small wooden bench, handmade, unfinished, no plaque, just a carving burned into the seat. "Still here, Dad." I didn't know who left it. Maybe Marla, maybe her daughter, maybe someone else who saw the footage and couldn't unsee it. I sat, and for the first time since the attack, I closed my eyes without expecting the worst. Behind me, the observation tower loomed, not as a threat, but as a memory. A place where I taught Evan how to watch the world, how to stay still, how to choose his moment. Now it belonged to him. Lenora hadn't been seen since the vote. Rumors said she'd left town. Others claimed she'd hired a lawyer. None of it mattered. She'd already lost what she valued most, control. Because the moment the silence broke, her power ended. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits beneath a tree. Sometimes it waits. And when it moves, it's because someone stood up and made it. They held the final board meeting in the old community hall next to the tennis courts. Same room where Lenora used to preside like a monarch, gavel in hand, flanked by cronies who only spoke when she needed validation. Now, the long table at the front was half empty. Elias sat in the center seat, a folder neatly squared in front of him, hands clasped like he was still reminding himself that this was real. 2 new temporary board members flanked him. Residents voted in during an emergency quorum the week before. Real people, not hand-picked loyalists. The folding chairs filled slowly. Some faces I hadn't seen in months. Others who'd kept their distance since the vote now gave small nods as they took their seats. I sat in the back row, watching everything without blinking. There was no gavel, no flagrant display of authority. Elias stood without theatrics. This session has been called to finalize board transitions, issue formal statements regarding prior misconduct, and review recommendations made by the Community Accountability Committee. He paused, scanning the room. That includes acknowledgement of the assault on Evan Holvik and the board's initial mishandling of the response. A murmur passed through the room, low and unsettled. Elias didn't flinch. The footage has been submitted to law enforcement. The insurance carrier has launched a full investigation into the HOA's failure to enforce safety measures impartially. All related violations issued to the Holvik household have been rescinded, and official apologies are being issued to affected families who faced unlawful enforcement. He looked at me when he said it. I didn't move. This wasn't a performance. It was a process. "What about Lenora?" someone called from the side row. Elias nodded. "A civil claim has been filed. A criminal referral is pending. We've also submitted a cease request to revoke her HOA board certification status under state regulation 118.9, barring her from holding office in any governed neighborhood association." "Can we sue her?" a voice in the back asked. "That's up to the individual families and the Attorney General's office. But if enough residents want to file jointly..." He trailed off, the implication loud enough. Across the room, Marla Singh raised her hand. "Will we be transparent moving forward?" Elias straightened. "That's why I asked Mr. Holvik to bring his footage, not just the attack, the fines, the letters, the pattern." Every eye turned toward me. I stood, slow, steady. "I didn't come here to watch her fall," I said. "I came here because no one should ever be told that silence is the safest option. My son, he trusted this place, trusted the rules, trusted the people who enforced them. And that trust got weaponized." I walked to the front and placed the USB on the table. "This drive contains every citation issued by the board in the past 12 months. You'll see the pattern, who was targeted, who was protected, and who stood by doing nothing." I turned to face them. "Let this be the last meeting where we pretend silence is neutral." Then I sat back down. Elias picked up the drive with both hands, carefully, like it was heavier than it looked. The meeting ended without clapping, no ceremony, no celebration. Just a motion passed to dismantle the internal citation system and replace it with a third-party review process. Just a quiet walk out into the parking lot, beneath a sky smeared with late-afternoon gold. Micah was waiting beside my truck. "She'd hate this," he said. "Who?" I asked. "Mom." I smiled, just a little. She always said cowards dress like kings when no one's watching. And now everyone's watching. I nodded. He didn't ask how Evan was. He didn't have to. We both knew the clock was still ticking, slow and merciless. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. Because the story wasn't just mine anymore. Now it belonged to the people who watched that footage, to the residents who raised their hands, to the ones who realized too late that fear isn't safety, it's surrender. And Red Marsh wasn't surrendering anymore. The sun had just begun to sink behind the ridge when I returned to Eagle's Rest. The air smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet, thick, metallic, waiting. The grass was damp from sprinklers, and the bark of the old tree caught the last shards of orange light, making it glow like something sacred. I sat on the new bench and opened the folder Elias had given me earlier that day. Inside was the final draft of the community resolution, the one that would be submitted to the county for public record. The first page bore the new name in black lettering, Evans Post, dedicated to the preservation of justice and community integrity. Underneath, there was a short statement drafted by Marla and signed by half the neighborhood. It read, "For every voice that was once afraid to speak, this place stands as proof that silence is no longer our law." I stared at that line for a long time. Behind me, I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. Elias approached slowly, hands in his pockets, face tired but lighter than before. He didn't speak right away. He just stood beside the bench and looked up at the tower. "Insurance settlement cleared," he said quietly. "They accepted liability for the board's conduct. Civil penalties will follow. Lenora's disqualified from any future HOA board under state statute." I nodded. "And Kellen?" "In custody. No bail this time. The DA's building the case." He waited for me to say something, but I couldn't find words. Everything that could be said already existed in the stillness between us. Elias finally spoke again. "You know, the footage didn't just save your son's name. It saved this place. People needed to see what truth looks like when you stop hiding it." He turned to leave, but stopped a few paces away. "You did what none of us could." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped waiting." When he was gone, I let the quiet take over again. The kind of quiet that isn't absence, but aftermath. The deep, aching peace that comes after months of noise and fighting and fear. Somewhere behind me, children's voices drifted from the sidewalks. Laughter again. The sound of a neighborhood exhaling. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was one of Evan's notes, a scrap I'd found in his desk weeks ago. It read, in handwriting I could still hear him saying aloud, "Don't fix everything, Dad. Just fix what matters." The hospital had called that morning. Evan had moved his hand, just once, just barely. But it was enough for the nurse to mark it on his chart. Enough for me to feel like the world wasn't entirely cruel. I leaned back against the bench, the wood still, rough and smelling of resin. The wind picked up, tugging at the leaves above me. They made the same sound they used to make when he climbed too high and laughed at my warnings. The observation tower loomed in the background, lit from below now by soft yellow lamps. City officials had installed them earlier that day, part of the restoration effort. It no longer looked like a monument to vigilance. It looked like something reclaimed, a watchtower turned into a memorial. I took one last look at the banner still hanging from its side. Justice is not granted, it's maintained. Maybe that was the real legacy, not mine, not even Evan's, but ours. The families who stayed, who refused to let intimidation rewrite the truth. I stood and placed my hand against the trunk of the tree. The initials we carved years ago were almost gone now, fading into the bark. I pressed my fingers there anyway, felt the roughness, the memory, the permanence of it. "You're still here," I whispered. The breeze shifted through the branches, and for a moment, it almost sounded like an answer. Before I walked away, I turned once more toward the tower and the open sky beyond it. The light had dimmed to gold and violet, the kind of light that means something new is beginning. If you've ever fought something bigger than you, if you've ever stood alone until others finally stood with you, then you understand. Justice doesn't roar. It doesn't beg. It doesn't vanish when you look away. It waits, and when you're ready, it answers. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?